What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and word has reached my ears that they are apparently changing the origin of Namor the Submariner for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And it actually makes good sense that they're doing that, because if they kept Namor's origin the same, well, there is the obvious allusions to Aquaman of Atlantis, which I really think is the least of their concerns. I mean, honestly, I feel like even if Namor was just a carbon copy of Aquaman in terms of origin, people would still say the movie's better, which it would be. But the other reason why I think this is a good idea is because of the nature of Atlantis. Trying to cram all that history in to what would basically be a 15-minute or so segment of the film would be insane, and it would just be too much to try to do. So, according to these leaks that are coming out, because again, it's not really confirmed by Marvel, but according to the leaks that are coming out, what they're saying is the character will not originate in Atlantis as in the comics, but in the Central American region, and will come from a historic and submerged city of Mexican culture. In addition, he will be the son of a human with a queen of the submerged people, and that Tenoch Huerta will play the character, who will also be accompanied by a royal guard. So I hope I pronounced that first name correctly. I'm terrible when it comes to Latin American pronunciations for names, but I think this is a smart idea. And here's the thing, right? Having him come from like any other region is fine, because it works. It's simple, it's really, really quick, it's easy to understand. The fact that his people have been submerged and just kind of hidden away from society for quite some time, people will be, like, the average person will be able to pick up on the fact that it's basically Atlantis. What this does is it gives Marvel the ability to dodge answering the question, how long has Atlantis been here, and what's its history, right? So here's the thing. Let me give you guys the rundown on Atlantis, and then you guys tell me in the comments if you think it's practical to explain this, even just a semblance of this history, in the span of 15 minutes, which is all we would really have in that film, since we're focusing on Namor and like the events of Wakanda and so on and so forth. So the way this works, and in order to grasp Atlantis, there's a few things you have to know. And the first of these is that there are differing accounts as to the history of Atlantis itself. You've got the Submariner number 10 from volume 1, you've got Invaders volume 3, issue number 12, you've got Avengers Annual number 20, which I actually didn't know about. I'd never read that comic. My editor pointed it out to me, and I was like, this is a really important thing. So kudos to Alex for finding that. But there are differing accounts about its history. But there is a kind of generality insofar as how things just generally transpired as an overall concept in Marvel Comics relating to Atlantis, the Atlanteans, how they came into existence, and all that kind of stuff. Again, in like Invaders Volume 3, issue number 12, for example, the idea is that the Atlanteans actually come from a planet called Vodan, so they're not native to Earth. They actually just came here somewhere along the line, and they've been here, and we don't know anything other than that. That's literally it. They're from Vodan, and like that's all Marvel gave us. So again, their own history is a little questionable, but going with the generally accepted history of Atlantis, if you look at the world as it exists today, it's not that dissimilar from the way the world existed at the time of the Atlanteans. I mean, you're talking about, or at least the time of this era in comics, right? You're talking about a 30,000 year period. And as you guys know, land masses don't shift drastically over the course of 30,000 years. So what you ended up having, of course, was Pangea, the giant landmass that existed. It broke apart. And when that happened, you basically had 4 giant chunks of land. The first one was the Americas. So what we in this day and age would consider everything west of the Atlantic Ocean, right? So North America, South America, all that stuff. Beyond that, or in the Atlantic Ocean, you had Atlantis and Lemuria. And then to the east of that, you have everything that we would consider in the modern era to be Asia, Europe, all that stuff, right? So those are like the 4 giant land masses as they were named at that point in time. Now, as you guys may know, just from either reading about it or looking up articles or having seen my videos or other people's videos, somewhere along the line, about 30 some odd thousand years ago or so, the Celestials showed up on Earth and modified the genes of early man in the form of the Wanderers. This took place in the Atlantic and Lemurian territories. But the important thing is that these individuals, their genes were modified so that 1/3 would become Eternals, 1/3 would become Deviants, and 1/3 would have their genes modified so that at some future point in time they would develop powers. Marvel uses that as an explanation for, 1, the origin of mutants, why it is that people started just getting these X genes activating all over the place, and 2, how it is that someone like Steve Rogers could be exposed to the super soldier program and not die of radiation sickness, and instead become Captain America. It's kind of Marvel's way of bookending those explanations in for how that stuff happens. But the long and short of this is, and really for our discussion, we're focusing on Lemuria, and we're focusing, or at least Lemuria, and we're focusing on Atlantis. So the idea behind this is that you had basically the deviants that set up residence in Lemuria and ruled it with an iron fist. In effect, the Eternals had basically abandoned their role of keeping humanity safe or protecting humanity from the inherent violent nature of the deviants. The Eternals just didn't really care. Now, there were some who did. Gilgamesh and like Icarus and those guys, they stood up for humanity, and they basically found themselves involved in wars against the deviants to protect humanity. But aside from them, most Eternals didn't care, and rightfully so. They were dealing with their own civil war. But the thing about this is that the deviants captured or conquered most of the world. And in fact, the only territory that was governed by humans that was safe from the control of the deviants was Atlantis. And there were a couple different reasons for this. One, because Atlantis was so technologically advanced, they were capable of being able to repel the forces of Lemuria. But the second reason for this is because Atlantis was a huge trading hub. Because it was a free territory that was not conquered by the deviants, it basically meant that you had a huge cultural exchange here. So you could go to Atlantis and get things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get in different parts of the world. This was also the reason why, while the deviants did try to capture Atlantis a few times, they were really more half-hearted measures, right? It was kind of an exercise in displaying their power as opposed to a genuine desire to capture Atlantis. Different, rulers of the deviants did actually want to conquer it legitimately, but for the most part, they never really succeeded. However, Atlantis itself was governed by a kind of religious society, or a religious monarchy, if you want to call it that. The reason why this matters is because with these different priests and priestesses that were practicing magic, what they realized is that with the deviants consistently trying to conquer the Atlanteans, a time would come when only one of two things would happen. Either the deviants would be successful, in which case all would be lost, or there would be some kind of massive situation where both Atlantis and the deviant empire of Lemuria would be destroyed in the process, some great big huge cataclysm, war, or something along those lines. In order to protect themselves from that, the royal family, if you want to call it that, or the inner circle, or the ruling body, or what have you, constructed domes in Atlantis itself that were effectively impenetrable, that were indestructible. And so what this meant is that even if the deviants managed to successfully launch an attack in Atlantis, they never would have been able to destroy the governing body. This was particularly important because around this time, you basically ended up having the Celestials that returned to Earth in their second host to essentially look over their experiment and see how it was progressing. When they realized that the Eternals had abandoned their role in safeguarding humanity and allowed the deviants to just kind of do their own thing, the Eternals, of course, were drastically punished by the Celestials, but the deviants had actually attacked the Celestials. And so what it did is it led to the Celestials attacking the deviants and obliterating the capital city of Lemuria. When this happened, you basically saw the quote-unquote sinking of Lemuria and Atlantis, because they were in effect the same giant landmass. The result of this is that Lemuria sank, Atlantis fell before the oceans, but because of the domes that were constructed by the Atlanteans themselves, it kept them protected from basically drowning. And so what this did is it essentially led to the various priests and so on modifying the genealogy of those humans in Atlantis to give them the ability to breathe underwater. And that's why they went forward as the Atlanteans. Now, when it came to Lemuria, you actually saw South Lemuria, I think, which was essentially, the deviants had just kind of reconstructed their empire there as kind of an underground layer. But North Lemuria was actually explored by the Atlanteans as a branch-off group, and they formed a society for themselves over there. So that's why if you ever read Marvel Comics or you look up a Marvel Wiki or something like that, you'll see Lemuria referred to twice. One, as a territory belonging to the Deviants, and two, as the same territory being ruled by the Atlanteans, because technically speaking, a branch broke off and then went to Lemuria itself. Now, beyond that, there's other huge things that you could tie in. This is why offering an explanation like this in the movie, while it's way too long for a 15-minute segment, it could actually do wonders for building up the mythos of the MCU, because we know that you have like Sir Percy of Scandia, you know, we know you have like Black Knight, right, Dane Whitman, the Ebony Blade, and all that kind of stuff. Here's a crazy thing that you may not know. Among all the different people who were powerful in the realm of magic and so on and so forth that resided in Atlantis, you had two individuals that were more important than the others. The first one was a woman named Morgan Le Fay, who basically is this woman that's ridiculously powerful in terms of sorcery and all that kind of stuff, in terms of magic, and is actually on par with Doctor Doom. And then you had another guy named Meriden. Now that name may sound familiar to you, and the reason why is because Meriden had at one point left Atlantis, taken up residence in England as part of King Arthur's Knights of the Round Table, and changed his name to Merlin. Now eventually he left that, you know, when they all went to Otherworld and everything, he bailed out on that, and then he formed the Omniversal Development Court. He just sits on high, just monitoring and judging the multiverse, right? Just as you would expect with a guy who's probably a dick. But like, there's a lot of things that you could tie in, right? I mean, you could literally say like Merlin and all that stuff is real. Like, it's all actual things. And you could actually use Dane Whitman as a link to that, right? And then bring like Atlantis in and tie and really introduce this idea that all this history is tied together. But again, that's a lot to explain. That's a lot to dump in a 15-minute segment. Way too much for us to see in Black Panther 2. Now, if we ever got a Namor the Submariner movie, or if they gave us a TV show that explored the history of Atlantis, that would be great, because I've long since said really one of the best untapped possibilities in the Marvel Cinematic Universe right now is for them to basically do what I did with Marvel Comics, which was a history of the Marvel Universe, where we basically broke down the entire history of all the origins and everything in Marvel Comics, right? Like the origins of the Kree, the Skrulls, the Nova Corps, Earth, mutants, all that kind of stuff. Like, we broke all that stuff down into this great big huge series. And I feel like that is an amazing untapped possibility for the MCU to basically create what is in effect a documentary or a mockumentary series on Disney Plus that gives us this whole history of Earth in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and even the alternate realities, or I'm sorry, the alternate planets and places across the universe. I think the reason they haven't done that is because ever since the end of Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, they've kind of been flying by the seat of their pants. It feels like it, which is why I think this 10-year thing with Kevin Feige is particularly important, right? They're going out and planning this 10-year period in the MCU, like what comes next for the next 10 years. I think it's a really, really big deal. But nonetheless, right, let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Do you think this is too much for us to explain over the course of Namor the Submariner's appearance in Black Panther 2? Do you think they should have like their own series, right? Like a mockumentary series or a TV series that explores all this? Let me know what you guys think. But thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.